Well, I think um, education is, number one, I think, for a lot of people. And I think, you know, if if you're spending so much money on something, I don't know how often this town does an audit and figures out where the money is going to in these particular avenues. If one hasn't been done in a while, it might be a good idea to take a look at one and see where the money is going to and what can be cut in these schools and what can be redirected into different things. Is it because the school is older and it's costing a lot to maintain it? Okay, we'll look at the picture. Like, would it be cheaper just to try to get funding to build a new Page School, which is another one thing I had on one of my lists for objective is the school is, it's an old building, and anything over a certain amount of time requires a lot more money to maintain and to, keep it up. And sometimes that number surpasses if you just had built a new building in the first place. So maybe some of that maintenance can be reallocated into putting into a new building, and then you could save that money on the maintenance in the long run. You know, Also, if it comes to if that money needs to be there, look at where is there any wasted spending that can be, redirected to take care of other needs in this town. I think the primary thing is you don't want to raise people's taxes. I mean, that's probably the worst thing you can do. And no one ever wants taxes. No one ever wants to pay more for something. But also people want all the perks, like a good school system, a solid fire and police department and stuff like that. Um, I guess you just have to look at the numbers and see where you can move stuff around and cut stuff and, you know, well, I think the historic part of this town is amazing. There's a lot of buildings there, a couple hundred years old, and a lot of houses and stuff, and Page School being a historical building. I wouldn't be saying knock the building down, right? I could say we could find other uses for community centers. We could, you know, obviously that gym in the back is an addition. If you needed to downsize it and preserve the building as it is because it's a historical building, I have no issues with that if it could be used for something that's beneficial to the town, right? Maybe senior housing, right? A lot of times they take old schools and they turn them into senior housing because it's such a large building and the infrastructure is already there. And you can really do a good amount of renovations on these things to make these look. I've seen it firsthand. Like I said, coming from Revere, we had a lot of old buildings and we took some of the old schools and they didn't knock them down. They actually preserved them and they reused the buildings. City property, it's already there. We don't have to accumulate more land to build something like this. And obviously with the boomers are all, at the retirement age and they're getting to the point where senior housing is going to be needed for these people. It's be really, really important to look into how we can take care of these people in the long run, keep them in town, keep them comfortable and, stuff like that. And, this town has a lot of land, with the parks and stuff like that. And I've seen in certain municipals where they'll take like a park to build a new, school or something like that, but then they'll use some land from somewhere else to take place that. So the paid situation is if you reuse that building and all the property that's there, you could turn it into a community park or playgrounds and stuff like that. Keep it preserved, keep it the way it is. You don't have to really dig into it too much, right? You don't have to knock the building down if people wanted to save it. And then, just find another place to build, whether it's maybe in the parking lot in the front of the school, right? Maybe in the back of the school, maybe at the park across the street where the football fields and stuff are and stuff. Maybe you could find a compromise for a piece of land and there'd be a great opportunity to get people in the community involved saying, where would you think ideally this would give opportunity to put the school? And everyone's gonna have their opinion on something, but then you can overlook at it and say, well, this best fits for the infrastructure of the town. It makes it more accessible for everyone. This is where we're gonna do it, kind of thing. So working in construction and design, I know that once you get into a building that's over 30 years old, the cost to repair and to maintain starts overwhelming the amount of what the building's actually worth and how much it is cost just to build a new one. That's plain and simple, especially with older buildings. I know Paige had some renovations over the years. Until my son was in the school, I never really got a chance to see the inside of the school and what it really looked like until I kind of walked around and, noticed some stuff and everything and hearing stories from, things he sees in school and, reading on boards and stuff like that, right? Um, it's, I don't think, I mean, obviously we would hire people to go and do the evaluation for us to give us a really, number wise of what, what's going to cost. But just in personal experience, I know it costs way more to maintain an older building, to keep it up to standards that you need, especially for children, than it would be just to, focus on construction of a newer, modern type of building. it's unfortunate they don't build buildings the way they do anymore. And a modern building's lifespan is only about 30 years. And after that 30-year mark, it becomes more money. And it's just, they don't build things the way they used to do, right? Page School is a massive building. That building will probably survive way longer than any of us if no one ever touched it, right? Because of the way it's built, right? It's a massive, brick building. A lot of buildings like this in the state, but it's what's inside the building that makes it work, right? The heating, the water, the roof, right? A lot of that stuff becomes very expensive. Having an older school, it's going to cost a lot more money to heat and, keep that building cool, in the gym and areas like that in the summertime than it would be to build a modern building that has more efficient technology, more efficient heaters, air conditioning, air quality control type stuff like that. And these are our youngsters. These are the kids in this town. I mean, we got to protect them at any cost, right? You want to make sure there's no mold in the schools. That's a huge problem right there. You want to make sure their environments when we're letting them go to school all day, that they're safe and they don't have to worry about crazy stuff like, the building, problems at the end of the day, It could be better. I don't know I know that there was a sprinkler issue over the winter. The sprinklers had popped and the gym was out of use for a couple of weeks. The new renovation, right? Which is, right, you imagine that, right? And which would make you want to dive into that a little bit and like, why did the sprinkler, why did that happen over there? It wasn't, what happened when they were constructing that caused that problem, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I think it's just an older building in general. I know it costs more to maintain an older building than it does a newer building, right? And like we worked on a nice part of that budget of the town is going to the school. I'm curious if a lot of that goes to maintenance and repair, and if that's the case, then let's run the numbers and see where that takes us for a new building to maintain an older building, They're not building buildings out of brick anymore, right? It's mostly, whether it's wood or in a sense of a school, it'd be steel construction with, aluminum, facades and stuff like that. So, a lot of that stuff's not as durable as it is with a new building. But I mean, that's reality of construction in the United States, right?
You're right. It's about 50% of the municipal budget it goes to schools. I will say, I think the school district does an amazing job with the budget they have. Our per pupil expenditure is one of the lowest in the state, yet the test scores are pretty good. So I credit the administration with getting the maximum benefit out of the dollars that they have. The problem is we're in a regional district, and when you vote a budget, all three towns are participants in accepting this. And if 2 out of the 3 towns vote it down, the budget goes back. And if the budget is too disproportionate in one town, there's a 2-step equation that determines what each town pays. It potentially could put a town into an override situation, which we're not sure. Groveland might be this year. That's a very difficult situation to put a community in. West Newbury, fortunately, has not been in an override situation on schools in many years. So we have a bit of a luxury there. I would like to see the schools be able to get more money, but it's dependent on all 3 communities. So you can't sit there and say, get more spending. They're working to get more funding from the state, and that's a long-term project that has been a huge problem that they're trying to work on. And since you said Page School, let's address that too. I don't know if that's another one of your questions we should wait on or not, but okay. Page School is just last January we completed a conditions assessment of the facility. It's like 400 pages. We had a consultant come in and they told everything wrong with the school as far as energy, structural, and what it would cost to upgrade and everything else. So after that, we had a community meeting up at Page School, and all the residents were invited, and I think we had 150, 200 residents. It was a very good presentation to explain the problems with the facility. It's an old building. It's going to be difficult to upgrade that structure. So we're going to be with the dilemma of what do you do with the school? The town, being Angus in conjunction with the school district, because any funding through the state has to go through the school district because we're a regional district, is filing a statement of interest with this Mass School Building Association. If we get it, and that'll be going in April, so it's not like we've been doing nothing in the last year. That's been getting done. It's, again, another one of these processes that take a long time. Like when we did the high school, the upfront work was 6 years before you get ready to build. And we're probably on a schedule like that for Page. So the statement of interest will be going in April. Hopefully we make the cut and the state will accept it, which means that at a certain point they will agree to participate in funding a new project to a certain degree. And then we have to do a feasibility study, which is very expensive. And it's like, at that point, we'll have to study what the options are. And the state forces you to look at all the viable options. And those would be renovate the existing building, which would be, we know it's going to be very expensive and generally not reimbursable from the state. The next option would be to build a new school on the existing site. The next option to build a new school on a different site. And then the fourth option, which the state has told us that they're going to require us to look into, is to look at regionalization with Groveland and Merrimack at the elementary level, because we are a regional school district. So we're going to have to evaluate all those four options, assess costs of them, see what the state will let us do, and then we'll take it to the voters and the taxpayers, because they're ultimately the ones that say yes or no to the solution. So this is my own personal opinion, and I haven't talked to this as a select person with people or anything else. And this comes back from the 1999 master plan, which was their vision at the time. They had suggested we build a new elementary school on a parcel of land that's no longer available. But if we did it this time, and we have a parcel, the Dunn's parcel across the street, that is very clearly a parcel we're considering if we had to put a new school. We already own it, we have control over it. So if we put a new facility there, my vision, and maybe it's rainbows and unicorns, would be the existing building could be put out to bid and hopefully converted into a senior elderly housing facility. I mean, it's got magnificent views, and it would be good for that. And I think you need private investment money to do that versus when you're working municipal, everything has to be prevailing wage, and the cost and the requirements can drive costs up. So private can control things more. There are some people in town, and I cannot disagree with them, that are saying we should build on the exact same site because it is so magnificent with the views, and then take down the building. It's a good conversation to have, and we'll be having those conversations.